She walked into a luxury car dealership, got laughed at, and was kicked out like she was worthless. But the next day, her billionaire husband's Rolls-Royce pulled up. What happened next? A woman stepped into a luxury car dealership. Her clothes were simple, nothing flashy. The place was filled with men in expensive suits and women carrying designer bags. The air smelled of leather seats and polished floors. Salesmen stood near the cars, talking to wealthy customers, flashing their best smiles. But the moment she walked in, the room changed. A few employees exchanged glances, their expressions filled with silent judgment. She walked slowly, taking in the beauty of each car. Her fingers lightly brushed against the smooth surface of a Rolls-Royce. It was a masterpiece, shining under the showroom lights. For a moment, she imagined herself behind the wheel, feeling the power of the engine, the quiet hum of luxury beneath her hands. But she could feel the stares. They were not welcoming. A salesman leaned toward his colleague, whispering something. A chuckle followed. Another customer gave her a quick look, then turned away as if she did not belong there. Ever been judged based on how you look? What happens next will leave you speechless. She ignored the looks and kept walking. She had come here for a reason, but she had no idea what was about to happen next. A salesman stood near a sleek, black Rolls-Royce, fixing his tie as he watched the woman walk closer. His lips curled into a smirk. He had seen this type before. People who came in just to look, pretending they could afford something they never would. She stopped in front of the car, her eyes shining with admiration. "This one is beautiful," she said softly. The salesman let out a small chuckle. "Yes, it is. Handcrafted. The finest luxury you can find," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. Then he tilted his head, glancing at her plain dress and worn-out handbag. "But I am guessing you are just looking." She met his gaze. "I would like to know more about it. Maybe even test drive it." His smirk widened. "Ma'am, we do not do test drives for window shoppers." A few customers nearby glanced in their direction. One of them, a man in an expensive suit, let out a quiet laugh. Another whispered something to his wife, who shook her head with amusement. The woman's face remained calm. "I am serious," she said. The salesman sighed loudly, rubbing his temples as if she was wasting his time. Before he could say anything else, the manager, a tall man with a stiff posture, walked over. He looked her up and down, then turned to his employee. "Is there a problem here?" The salesman shrugged. "She is asking for a test drive." The manager's face showed no emotion. He gave the woman a tight smile, the kind that was not friendly. "Ma'am, we are quite busy with real buyers today. Perhaps you should try another dealership, one more in your range." The word stung, but she kept her composure. "I just wanted to see the car," she said quietly. The manager did not respond. Instead, he gave a small nod to one of the security guards standing near the door. A moment later, she felt a presence beside her. "Ma'am, let me walk you out," the guard said. Her heart pounded, but she did not argue. With every step toward the exit, she could feel the eyes on her, hear the muffled laughter behind her. The heavy glass doors shut behind her. Cold air hit her face. She had been humiliated, but this was not over. She sat on a bench outside the dealership. Her hands rested on her lap, fingers twisting together. She stared at the ground, blinking rapidly, forcing back the sting in her eyes. She would not cry. Not here. Not in front of them. People walked past her, paying no attention. Cars pulled in and out of the parking lot, their engines humming softly. Inside, through the large glass windows, she could still see the salesman laughing with another customer. It was like she had never even been there. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes. And then the memories came flooding back. Long nights working 2 jobs, barely getting enough sleep, coming home exhausted, her hands sore, her back aching, counting every dollar just to make it through the month. She had never cared about wealth. When she married her husband, it was not because of his money. Back then, he had nothing. They had built their life together, step by step, sacrifice after sacrifice. But none of that mattered to people like those in the dealership. They only saw the surface. They saw a woman in simple clothes and assumed she was worthless. Her jaw tightened. "Have you ever been treated unfairly?" Just because of how you look. She knew the answer, and she knew she was not alone. She looked down at her phone. One message. One call. That was all it would take. She stood up, dusted off her dress, and walked away. They thought this was over. It was not. She walked down the street, her steps slow but steady. The cold air brushed against her skin, but she barely noticed. Her mind was racing, replaying the humiliation over and over. Every laugh, every glance, every word. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. Her hands were steady now. She tapped on her husband's name and pressed call. The phone rang twice before he answered. His voice was warm, familiar. "Hey, love. Everything okay?" She took a breath, keeping her tone light. "I was thinking, should we get a new Rolls-Royce?" There was a pause. "A Rolls-Royce? That is unexpected. Why?" She smiled slightly. "I just think it would be nice to have one." He chuckled. "You have never cared about cars before." "I do now," she said softly. Another pause. Then his voice turned serious. "Are you sure this is what you want?" "Yes." "Then it is done. I will have my assistant handle everything today." She whispered, "Thank you." He sighed, as if trying to understand. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" "I know," she said. But she did not. Not yet. She ended the call and slipped her phone back into her bag. A car passed by, its headlights flashing across her face. She could have told him everything. About the salesman, about the manager, about how they looked at her like she was nothing. But words would not change what happened. Actions would. She looked back at the dealership, the lights shining through the glass. She imagined their faces when they saw what was coming. She turned away and started walking. Tomorrow, they would see her again. And this time, they would not be laughing. The next morning, the dealership was as busy as ever. Salesmen stood in their crisp suits, flashing rehearsed smiles at wealthy customers. The manager paced near the entrance, keeping an eye on everything. Then, the sound of an engine broke through the usual chatter. A sleek, brand-new Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up, its deep black paint reflecting the sunlight. The car glided to a stop right in front of the entrance. The showroom fell silent. Salesmen rushed forward, their postures straightening, adjusting their ties. A VIP customer had arrived, the kind they dreamed of impressing. The driver stepped out first, opening the passenger door with precision. A man emerged, tall, confident, dressed in a perfectly tailored designer suit. His watch alone cost more than most cars in the showroom. He adjusted his cufflinks, scanning the dealership with calm authority. Then another door opened. She stepped out. No hesitation, no uncertainty. This time, she walked with confidence, her head high, her eyes steady. The salesman from yesterday was already making his way toward them, his usual smug grin plastered on his face. "Ah, sir. Welcome. We have the best selection for you," he said eagerly. "Whatever you are looking for, we will make sure you get the best deal." Her husband did not respond right away. Instead, he turned to her, his expression calm but knowing. "Did they treat you well yesterday?" he asked. The color drained from the salesman's face. His smirk disappeared in an instant. Her husband's question hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. The employees around them shifted uncomfortably. The manager, standing nearby, swallowed hard. The salesman opened his mouth, but no words came out. She did not need to say anything. The panic in his eyes told her he already knew the answer. Her husband looked at the manager. "I assume you remember my wife." The manager's throat bobbed as he forced a smile. "Sir, there must have been a misunderstanding. We treat all our customers with respect." Her husband raised an eyebrow. "That is not what she told me." The silence was suffocating. Then, her husband took a step forward. "We will be buying today," he said, "but not from you." He turned to another salesman, the one who had not laughed yesterday. "You handle the sale." The chosen salesman nodded quickly, grateful. The others could only watch, their faces pale. She glanced at the first salesman one last time. No anger, no words, just a quiet, knowing look. Then she walked inside. The manager forced a nervous smile. "Sir, please, let us make this right. We value our customers." Her husband held up a hand. stopping him mid-sentence. His voice remained calm. "We prefer to buy from those who respect my wife." Silence. The salesman's face turned red. He looked around, as if hoping for a way to fix his mistake. The other employees stood frozen, their forced smiles gone. Her husband turned to her. "Shall we?" She nodded. Together, they walked toward the exit. The driver hurried to open the Rolls-Royce door. She stepped in first. Her husband followed without another glance at the people who had judged her. As the car pulled away, the realization hit the dealership staff like a slap. $1 million sale. Gone. All because they assumed. All because they judged. Inside the dealership, no one spoke. The salesman who had laughed at her stood stiff, his hands clenched. The manager exhaled, rubbing his temples. They had made a mistake they could never undo. Respect should never depend on appearance. You never know who you are talking to.